Welcome to the Chain Mountain Podcast. I'm your host, Hank Ackerman. In this week's episode, we speak with SAP Implementation Guru Nick Jackson. Nick is the Global Director of SAP and ERP at H.B. Fuller. H.B. Fuller is a $3.5 billion adhesives manufacturing. They make adhesives, sealants, and other specialty chemical products and have operations around the globe. Nick has spent the past 25 years of his career implementing systems across large global manufacturing companies, so not new to what is needed. In our discussion, we cover his takes on why ERPs often don't meet expectations, the importance of educating executives, and reducing complexity. He also emphasizes the need for a well-constructed data model, effective change management, and understanding business process first. In our discussion, we also touch on the future of leadership, communication, and ends with a hot take on life in 2075. Hope you enjoy. Nick, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm really excited about this discussion. You, as I mentioned before, you're our kind of first guest who has a lot of ERP experience and kind of lives in that ERP implementation space. And how that is so important in today's supply chain and operations is the technical side. I think it's really important for young folks to really understand how technology can facilitate and be accretive to the operation. I wanted to start off with one number, 75. And 75 is the percentage of ERP implementations that fail to achieve expected benefits, right? And I've been fixing ERP implementations, most of them SAP, for about 15 years now. And I feel confident that that number might actually be a little bit higher than most companies think, partially because they really have no way of effectively knowing. They don't do a very good job of kind of taking the baseline and then saying, hey, did I actually improve or not, right? But I think you have a really unique take on this, right? Can you maybe tell me, how does SAP help to expose, not necessarily fix, business process inefficiencies?
Sure. At 75%. Wow. If you would have asked me what that number was, I would have probably said 100%. Fail to achieve business outcome, because I think if you were to ask everybody on this call to define value and business outcome for an ERP project, everyone has different opinions, and even within a company, they have different opinions.
Yeah.
But going back to your question, why in my view do companies fail to achieve that value, and why is SAP often, I would say, to blame? Is very simple. My take on it is because what SAP does very well, besides being an application to help you run your business, is it exposes your business inefficiencies. And when it exposes those business inefficiencies, people naturally look to the tool set to fix those problems. Well, the old adage of garbage in, garbage out still exists today. So if you don't have good processes, good data to execute your business, SAP is not going to fix that magically. A tool does not fix broken processes and bad data. So to expect an ERP implementation to magically make your enterprise run better, you're never going to achieve the benefits. And I think a lot of times businesses start their digital transformation with, we have a tool, it's going to solve our problems. And then at the end, they realize they've created what I like to coin this term of transformational debt, where the tool has been delivered, but at the end of the day, they realized all I did was shift from fixing the technical layer to now my business processes and data are really messed up. And if they would have spent the time up front fixing that first, then done the tool, they would achieve the benefits of an SAP implementation. And often that's where I see the misstep. So over the past 20 years of leading these digital transformations or these enterprise transformations that I've done in my career, a lot of times I partner with the business and say, what are we trying to achieve here? And expose these broken processes, because if we fix those, the tool comes along, the technology works. So that's my view on this problem.
Yeah. I think that's a Those are all excellent observations and true to what I've experienced. And I like your transformational debt. That's you heard it here, everybody. Nick Jackson said it first. I think one of the interesting things about transformations as well is, how many, I think CIO.com said 40% of ERP projects go over budget and another 60% experience schedule overruns, right? So obviously there's a challenge, right? And being able to set realistic expectations with management, or come up with a good ROI on a project to be able to say, here's how much we're going to spend, here's how much we're going to get in terms of benefit, right? Um, Obviously, there's hey, I want it to be fast, I want it to be high quality, and I want it to be low cost simultaneously, right? What, in your experience, and kind of how do you go about setting a realistic expectation with executives on, listen, the super fast, low cost option is, and quality option really doesn't exist. Maybe there's some other balance of it, right?
Well, yeah, I tell the executives I work with, I wish I was a magician. But at the end of the day, I really only have three levers I can pull in an ERP project. It's quality, it's cost, and it's time.
Right,
Those are the only three levers I have to pull. And if you want speed, quality and cost will suffer. If you want cost, then we have trade-offs in quality and time. And then
right,
it's the other side of the pyramid. It is really that simple. And there's the old adage in business, if you want it cheap, you want it good quality, and you want it fast, you can't
yeah,
have all three. Well, it's the
right,
same way with an ERP project. And I think a lot of times when you start out on this journey, especially when you implement something as widespread and as transformational and as invasive as an ERP project, you don't do a good job doing scope creep. And we've all seen that comic where who wants change and everyone raises their hand. Now who's willing to change and no one puts their hand up, right?
that's right.
And that's what you come out to at the end of the day is these are hard projects because you're asking in many cases people to change how they've done business. And to be effective at transforming a business, you have to change, which means naturally it is hard. The hard part,
Right,
again, is not the technology, it's getting people to change behavior, how they worked, and how the organization has technically performed over the past X number of years. And so that's where you experience these cost overruns and schedule overruns, is because you're dealing with the human factor, and that's naturally hard to control. And so you experience that, and especially when you don't have your top level executive management in alignment, because each one of them have their own, I say, kingdom, turf they're trying to protect. And so
right,
always I'm trying to balance the stakeholder alignment through the whole process. But I always go back to is what are we trying to service here? Quality, time, or budget? Because based upon which one you prioritize as an executive committee, I'm going to run the plan accordingly. And then, we can change the dynamics, but it's trade offs. And then it's how
right.
you manage the risk profile of the company along the way.
Yeah. In your history, I find it oftentimes a lot of work to educate executives on what is an ERP system, what's the difference between one that's functioning and working well and one that's not functioning and working well, and how to implement one, right? I think unless you kind of live through it a couple times, it's hard to kind of internalize and grasp the magnitude of that. In your experience, do you find that true? I mean, do you find you have to do a lot of education, and what are kind of some of the key, I guess, lessons that you would pass along to other people going through the same journey to say, here's the important things to educate them on, right?
Yeah. Education and upfront education is probably the key when you start these projects. And I think it's probably the most overlooked step in the whole process because everyone wants to just
Interesting. Yeah.
start.
Yeah.
And it's, starting education day one. And, there's just a few questions that I have found in my career that help illustrate or shine a light to maybe those aha moments with the executive staff that
Right.
kind of show them, hey, this is going to be more difficult than we thought, or maybe the magnitude of change that we want to embark on is bigger than we thought. So, for example,
Hmm.
I ask my CFO sometimes in this journey, how many manual journal entries do you do? How many exceptions do you have to your AP process? Or ask the COO, how many cycle counts do you do? Or how many
Hmm.
physicals do you do? And what's your variance? Not just your normal dollar variance, but what's your absolute variance? And the reason I ask those business questions is then I really say, okay, if your absolute variance is very big, we have an inventory management control problem that's only going to be amplified when we
Mm.
go to a real time
100%.
transactional management system.
Right. Yep.
And then I can relate back to say if your
100%.
current state is a batch management transactional system, then we're moving to real time management system. Just you start breaking it down and put them on this education journey of current state, future state. And you almost have to take the executive state and those high level key stakeholders through this. I call it sometimes phase zero or pre
Right.
launch phase
Hmm.
of the magnitude of change the organization is going to go through. Because when you go down to the shop floor, you get to that AP clerk,
Hmm.
by and large, rank and file, they just want to do a good job. They want
That's
to
it.
come in
Yep.
every day, they want to do their job, and they just want to execute.
Hmm.
And yes, they want to deliver corporate results. They want to do the rah rah speech. They're there for the kickoff. But long after the kickoff's over and we're in the midst of UAT and deployment, everyone's forgot about the rah rah kickoff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So making the executives understand and feel the pain and saying, you know, 60% of my, I do 60% of my journal entries are top line after close. Well, you don't really have real time postings occurring. And now we're moving to a real time system. We have some broken processes in finance. And now what's the implications of that going to mean when we put in an integrated system?
Right. Right.
So that education really starts to not only help them understand, but then it helps my project management and my key leads. Okay, how are we going to approach our discovery sessions? Because you have to start building a risk profile for the company and that project immediately and start building almost your talk track, key key talk track points, because I call them seeds. You're
Right.
planting seeds day one. You have to water for that implementation that's not going to happen for 12 to 18 months
Right.
because change and change management is the key to making these things successful.
Yeah. 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 That's great. And we'll get to that in a minute. I have a couple questions on that. I want to maybe shift a little bit to, you talked a little bit about the data side. Um, there is Gardner said only 14% of the companies trust the data coming out of their ERP systems, right? It's a shockingly low number. And we see it all the time, right? Folks basically doing all of their work outside of SAP and Excel spreadsheets and then putting stuff into the system, right? I happen upon that more than I would be comfortable admitting. Um, in terms of kind of the role of an ERP, though, right? I think it had originally intended to automate certain processes, right? The selling point now is that it's shifting towards decision augmentation, right? Um, how can we trust decision augmentation if we don't trust the data that it's using, right?
Well, you know, I I talked about transformational debt. And I will say in transformation, there's a five-letter word that's required, and it's called trust. And if you're at
Yeah,
14% of trusting your data and you're building outside systems outside your main ERP system,
yeah,
you have a trust problem.
right,
So how are you going to expect things like AI to work if you don't trust the underlying data? That's, I think, what companies are starting to see. And that's why you're seeing, ERPs be repositioned as their decision-making tools now, because
Right.
it's just not the ERP, it's other data sources augmented with ERP data to
Yeah.
make decisions. But ultimately, well-run organizations do go back to a single source of the truth. And this is where, decision makers have to be aligned that, as painful as it is, I only trust facts that come from the system, be it SAP, Oracle, named your ERP of the day. And yes, I may not like the presentation of the data or how the data looks when it comes out, but that's an IT problem. I'm not going to go instruct my reporting clerk to go build a separate spreadsheet or a PowerPoint to present the numbers to me in a different way. The moment that happens, you create distrust. And then you proliferate that distrust in the organization because you keep an offline reporting system up and running that's outside your main ERP. And then you just proliferate this transformational debt problem.
Right. Right. That's a good point. And I see a lot of issues where there's not been, maybe there's been some business process mapping that's been done a little bit, right? But no one's ever gone through and said, what are the key business decisions and when that I need to make, right? What information do I need to make those decisions? And then what data do I need to inform that information, to create that information? So thinking backwards into what are the reports, when do I use those reports, all that kind of stuff, right? Obviously, SAP has a lot of standard reports, which cover some of the standard components of the business process. But I think that, what's unique to your business and what your kind of governance cadence is going to be, the KPIs, all that kind of stuff. Oftentimes that's an afterthought in the implementation, right? And I think that creates a major struggle in terms of what are you focused on, making sure what data really needs to be right in the system, right?
Yeah. There's two things in my 20 plus year career that I have learned that helped me be successful that I would pass on as a tip. There's two key items that make an ERP implementation successful. One, understanding the balance sheet and how the balance sheet works. Because once you understand the financials, you understand how the whole company works. And two,
Yes.
understanding the top line KPIs the whole company runs by. Because once you understand how the top line KPIs for the company runs, that will tell you immediately how the processes have to be set up to fuel those KPIs. And
Right.
often what happens is two things. One, your balance sheet gets built, what I like to call by accident, as a result of process mapping. And then the latter is you get done to the end of the project, you get past UAT, you go live, and then someone says, how am I going to measure my days outstanding?
Right.
And
Yeah.
everyone then hustles around to build that report versus understanding the top line KPIs day one and the balance sheet day one. Those are your use the term North Star.
Right.
Those are your guiding principles. Now, does that mean those have to be built into the system? Your balance sheet, yes. To your top line KPIs, not necessarily. The underlying data to drive those KPIs, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I have found that that is often overlooked by some of the best ERP implementation firms and
Mm-hmm.
practitioners.
100%. 100%. I think in relation to that, I think one of the things that is underappreciated in ERP implementations is complexity, right? And I run into a lot of clients where they're fantastic at generating new products, and there's little understanding as to, I'm going to release, 10, 20, 30 new products, and especially in when you're getting into fashion retail, right? Thousands of SKUs, every few years. There's little appreciation in terms of the complexity that create in the system, right? Every single SKU now proliferates master data and requirement to put in new safety stocks and all that kind of stuff. And I think that clouds obviously a lot of the information and the KPIs, right? And I think I always joke, the A in SAP stands for complexity, right? um, but like, we're seeing, I think, oftentimes in clients from the point that they actually implement um, a, a system 4 or 5 years down the line, they've doubled or tripled the amount of information in the system, right? And not only does it bog down the processing speed, but the amount of master data now that has to be maintained is egregious. And so the first exercise you kind of go through is typically this inventory analysis to say what's moving, what's not moving. And you typically find somewhere between 35 and almost 50% of their product kind of in this low, slow moving, call it slob inventory. And so there is, also you can kind of correlate and it's like 35% of the data that you're sitting on is useless to your company,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let's get rid of it. Let's sit it aside. Let's get that out of the way, right? So that we don't have to maintain that. And I think that's big. Um, One of the things kind of, if I look at, past periods of technological disruption, and right now we're seeing kind of a separation of the mega firms to the rest of them, right? OpenAI, Anthropic, and Gemini examples, right? Um, but on the app side of AI, we're now seeing dozens of new entrants every day. And I look back at the fight between Google and Apple and PC, right, for your data and your apps, and I have all three of those that I wrestle with, on a daily basis. Um, One of the dangers I see of AI and all of these new apps coming forward is an increase in that complexity, right? We're just increasing the velocity of the creation of the rat's nest, right? We're already very good at creating rat's nests. Now we're going to increase that. We're going to add all these new bolt-ons. We're going to add all this new data. The data is going to proliferate even faster. Talk to me about your thoughts on that. Is this a valid concern? Have you seen, some of these apps, kind of needing to be bolted on in your organization yet? What are your thoughts on that?
I have lots of thoughts on this topic because I'll start
Good.
with the word complexity.
Yeah, yeah,
When I hear the word complexity in a business setting, it just sends shivers up my spine. It's one of those words that when I hear it said, we're complex, what that signals to me is we don't understand how our business runs. And we have lived for years in trying to find silver bullet applications
right,
to fix our problems.
right.
And now we have a hodgepodge or a rat's nest, using your
Yeah, yeah,
terminologies,
yeah,
of applications stitched together that has made a data model that is so cumbersome, no one knows how to manage it. So now we're looking for another tool to wrap itself around the data model to make sense of that data model to report out the facts because we're so complex.
yep,
And, I compare it to some of the problems I'm facing, in my day job of like indirect procurement. It's a complex project. It's a complex problem, and we're trying to implement an indirect procurement project. And I'm like, doesn't everybody buy pens and pencils the same way across the globe? How difficult is this? Well, it's complex. Is it really, or have we not really understood and put policies in place and enforced a consistent data model? And do we really just have a hodgepodge of broken processes, broken tools that we've stitched together for 12 to 15 years that now
right,
we're trying to fix with this project? And it is complex because you're trying to unravel 12 to 15 years of technical debt that was created. And
right,
so yes, I think what you're
right,
seeing now is you're seeing software companies capitalize on the fact that corporate America is in this crossroads with SAP and with a lot of ERPs as they
yeah, yeah,
they shift from on-premise to cloud, that they have an opportunity that, you know, businesses have created tons of data, and everyone's trying to find that competitive edge, and they're trying to come in and sell them the next silver bullet. We can
Yeah.
unlock your information or unlock your data to provide you better insights.
Right.
Well, I always get leery because I'm like, how do you know my business better than I know my business? And so that's how I look at it is, yeah, I think it's a problem,
Yeah.
but the good organizations understand their data model, keep a simple data model, and combat the word complexity. The
Right.
good organizations I have worked for in my 20 plus years, they fight complexity and keep a simple data model to run the business. And these are Fortune 500 firms.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. The data model is an understated kind of focus point, I think, often, especially now that when you're going to the cloud, right? And it becomes really important that you have, data model continuity between different applications, right? Which is in theory some of the advantage of a system like SAP, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
some level of data model continuity, but introduce AI apps and other bolt-ons, and then introduce complexity in the data models. And now you've got integration layers and that needs to be maintained, right? And then your technical debt really starts to escalate very, very quickly, right?
Yes.
So I definitely appreciate that and appreciate your thoughts certainly on just the concept of complexity. It, it an analogy I often use is, with clients going into this is kind of, listen, right now you're trying to develop or at least lay out what the playbook of plays is. So for those of you, who understand American football, very simple. In your offense, you have different plays that you run, right? Are you the type of organization where you're going into this thing and you're saying, your integrator's going, you know what? I think you need a West Coast offense. Let's implement a West Coast offense, right? And really, you need a little league offense, right? You need to learn how to run the ball at the middle, run the ball left, run the ball right. Very, very simplistic plays. And you find companies kind of overstretching their implementation and creating more complexity from the number of different types of processes that I'm trying to scope into this, plus the master data and the transactional data that I'm now proliferating along with it, right?
Yeah, yeah. What I like to say is that maybe a different way of saying it is
Yeah, yeah,
get the basics right and get the basics working,
yeah,
and then build on the enhancements. If you can't
yeah,
do the basics, why do you think you can do the next step? A prime example is integrated business process planning, or sales forecasting, S&OIP. That is something you don't scope in to day one of your ERP implementation. That's a phase two, phase three, because
right,
you're not going to achieve that day one because you're going to just trying to be figuring out how to use MRP. So if
right,
you think you're
right.
going to be able to do S&OIP day one on your first wave of implementations, you're going to fail. And
Yeah,
a system integrator, an SI, should be telling you that, but they're there to build.
yeah,
So that's where someone like myself working with the business has to be an advocate for my business partner, and then have to work with my executives to paint, here's the vision of where you want to go. Yeah, you want to get to integrated business process planning, but it's a journey, and here's how we're going to get to it. We're going to do, the first step is we're going to get the foundation fixed. Then we're going to move into some more advanced concepts. Then we can put the roof on around the whole process. But if we jump to step three without getting the foundation and the walls built, the house is going to collapse.
right.
And I often see companies going right for the last step and forget the basics along the way.
Another stat, right? 50% of ERP customizations often become obsolete within 3 years, right? Due to a process or a system change, right? I think there is a big transition going to cloud because, cloud determines what system functionality there is, right? Whereas in the old on-prem days, I had control over and I could do a lot of customization. And frankly, ERP implementers, made a lot of money off of those customizations, right? So they often supported that and said, yes, you can, I'll do whatever you want me to do, right? Let's just do a customization, et cetera, et cetera. And, bang, bing, bang, boom, all of a sudden companies find themselves with a completely customized, modded out ECC system. And now they're going to go back to S4 and simplify a lot of what they've got to do because S4 simply doesn't have that functionality anymore, right? In terms of kind of how you're thinking about the difference between, the move to S4 HANA and or, be it a public or private cloud, what's your kind of what is your approach to thinking about customization and, there's always the age old, standard business process, right? And I laugh at that because it's so Pollyanna, right? That just everybody's gonna be the same, and that's the right thing for everybody. And there's quite a lot of configurability, within S4. But what's your thinking on that in terms of kind of how to find that balance between customizing, a system to a business need versus standard process, right? Now that we're in the cloud.
Yeah. So I would ask the listeners to take a deep breath. I'm going to take you on a journey here. Okay.
Perfect.
And take a
Okay.
breath because these are some radical thoughts to start thinking about. I
Okay,
think
good. Oh,
as we transition from this on-prem world where it was, what I like to say, soup du jour, you could have whatever you want.
mhm.
And we go to this cloud world, it's not going to be that way. Now, yes, you can have whatever you want in a cloud world, but it's going to cost you. You're going to have to pay to have that customization, and SAP has ways for you to do that. So if you still need that security blanket and you just can't get rid of it, you can have it, but it's going to cost you, and that's through what they call the BTP layer, the business
Mhm.
technology platform. But what I would ask and I would challenge companies to think about is at the end of the day, I like to say business comes down to some fairly basic fundamental facts, right? There's a need that a customer has. There's a decision, are you going to make or buy it to fulfill that need? You fulfill it, you ship it, you collect the cash, and you report that to the street or to some type of reporting mechanism, right? That's basic concepts of how business works. And I know I'm very much simplifying how business works. And every one of your listeners are saying, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. My business is way more complex than that. But if you really unlock your thinking right now, business pretty much works in those big, broad strokes. Now, you peel the layer back of the onion, you get into the intricacies of how each of those decisions work, how you ingest that need of that customer, be it a email that comes in or a quotation or a web portal or an EDI. Then you get into all those various channels.
Right, right.
But if you start really just thinking about your business in very simplistic terms, then you start to say, okay, my business, yeah, really works in these very simplistic pillars. How can I make my business processes work like that? Then once you say, okay, my core business can work, but you know what really makes me different is I really am good in precious metal buying, or I'm really good in my go-to-market strategy around X. Or yes, my manufacturing processes differentiate me from my competitors. That's where you need to spend your time in customization. How you take a sales order, does that
Right.
really make you different than your competitor?
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
not. And I think that's where companies get really wrapped around the axle is they're like, oh, this is what makes us special. But is it
Yeah.
really what makes you special compared to your competitor? Or is it, no, how we do our pricing or how we do our rebate program, or this is our competitive edge when we look across our peer group? That's where I want to have the conversation with my stakeholders to say, okay, if we got to customize and give, that's where we're going to give. But how we record production, guys, does it really
Is
matter
it?
at the end of the day? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I know it's not elegant. It's not super fast. Yeah, the user just can't think and record production. But is it really going to make you better than your competitor next door? No.
Hmm.
But how we ship and track goods to our end consumer, that's a competitive advantage because we have a great portal user experience for them. We need to invest our customization there. So
Yeah.
understanding that is very critical in these projects. And I think this is where people get concerned is they're thinking, oh, when we go to the cloud, we can't have that anymore. No, you can still have it. There's ways to have it. And, I compare and contrast the shift for ERPs to the cloud to when like things like Salesforce came out or CRM tools came out on the internet
Right.
first. They
Right.
put everyone into a cookie cutter process, and everyone just went into the process. And what I laugh about is I can remember the days of every what I like to call Wall Street Journal CIO coming in on Monday saying, "Hey, I just read that this SaaS tool is going to save us 80% of XYZ if we go
That's
implement
right.
it."
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're only going to do that if you do the standard process, which means you have to fit within the cookie cutter implementation. But then you say, well, we're going to do this with our core ERP. Oh, we can't do that. Well, wait a minute here. You just told me you could do it here, but you can't do it here. Do
Right.
we really understand where we need to invest our customization dollars? Because everything's a trade off
Yeah.
at the end of the day, Hank. Everything's a trade off.
It's a That's a great that last comment. I think you nailed it. Right. Do you understand where you're going to spend those customization dollars? One area I walk into with a lot of clients when you're kind of remediating their process is the lack of a good, call it business rules, and often the business rules with their customers, right? So have we established, the value stream models that we want to really now be able to systematize, right? How are we getting orders from customers? And often what happens, and nothing against salespeople, but they're creatively looking for ways to create competitive advantage. And so sometimes they'll have a conversation with the customer and then come back and be like, oh, by the way, we need to do VMI at the customer. Like, can we just set that up, right? With no appreciation for the fact that, now I'm creating all of this need for, systemization of that VMI, all this additional master data that I need to think through, potentially integrations, right? All of the work that's entailed. And again, the complexity that I'm driving there. I think as in the cloud world, as you pointed out, right, you can have those customizations, right? Just make sure that you're prioritizing and you're very, very thoughtful about it. But that's often a place where I feel like the business, I wouldn't want to choose my word carefully, right? Capitulating to a customer's needs or at requests creates a lot of that need for customization, right? Where you could push back again if that salesperson or if the management is knowledgeable about what the implications are, right?
Agreed. And what I talk about a lot in the terms of customization, and VMI is a good example, pricing is a good example, pricing
Right.
procedures,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
is what are we, let's focus on the desired business outcome. The how we achieve it, the people that determine the how depends on who has that decision making authority. So the how could be someone in finance if it's a decision around VMI or a pricing procedure, or the how could be a technology perspective if we have to do a system enablement change. But if the desired business outcome is to give the customer better terms, the sales agent said, I want to do this via VMI. Well, you could
Right.
achieve that same thing with just by giving them terms or a pricing discount without doing VMI, right? And that's where the decision authority making rights don't always come through. I always get nervous when my business partners come to me and say, we have a solution, you need to go implement in the system. And the first thing I say is, what are we trying to achieve with the business? And there's always this uncomfortable pause. And I just sit there and I'm like, I can sit here all day because if you can't define for me what you're trying to achieve, how do you expect me to build it? But better yet, how do we know we achieved what we wanted to get out of the exercise?
Right. Right. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's it. So how do modern executives cut through the digital noise, right? And your opinion, kind of focus on those right priorities. What are the right priorities? Well, not that you have to say the right priorities, but in your perspective, right? How do they need to cut through that digital noise?
I will tell you, I mean, the noise and the amount of information that is coming at me every day or coming at executives every day is just increasing
Oh yeah,
rapidly. And, you know, um, I use the case in point of, let's just talk about the stock market, right? I remember growing up in the 80s, you know, earnings would get reported, and it was a day later or a week later that you would see a reflection in the price. Then the 90s came, and then it was like maybe the next day or 2, 3 days later. Then
mm-hmm.
the 2000s came, and then we started talking about pre-earnings.
Yeah,
And now we live
yeah,
in the
yeah,
2020s, and it's like
yeah,
they're announcing after the earnings, and I'm
yeah,
watching the ticker after close. Every word the CFO,
yeah.
the CEOs change, and I'm watching the ticker change in real time. How do we expect people to make decisions that rapidly? And they're looking for technology to make those decisions for them. I think the best leaders are those leaders that can cut through that noise and stick true to their guiding principles and say, okay, I
Right,
understand the noise and chaos is around us, but I can cut through that and articulate our mission. And I'm not going to get distracted with the foil or the shiny object in the room. But I'm also smart enough as a leader to know that when I course correct, I can articulate why I need to course correct. And I think that's a key that's also missing today is people can't articulate why they need to course correct, and they lose people along the way.
right.
And,
That's a really good observation. Yeah.
yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Do you think, and I mean, you're in a position where I think you have internal customers, if you will, right? And internal executives that you get to see, but you also get to see new executives coming up, and some of the older, more experienced executives now retiring. So you've seen multiple generations of customers. Do you feel like critical there's a lot of common thread around critical thinking amongst younger leaders is declining. Do you think that's the truth? Is that your observation, that critical thinking is declining amongst younger leaders, or is it increase in digital noise? Is it they are now have different priorities that they need to think about? Kind of what's your observation about some of the younger leaders you're observing moving up?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And someday when I retire from this, I'll probably sit back and want to write my memoirs of all the generations of the workforce that I've worked with.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, I go back to when I was starting out, and I think about myself when I was in my early 20s in 2001, and just living through that time and how I reacted to such events at 9/11 and how that shaped me and how the leaders today are acting to events that have happened in their life. And I remember a very influential executive that I had that took me aside and helped shape my career. And I was always impressed with him and how he handled himself and how he had all this wisdom. And I called him the Oracle. And what always impressed me about Mike was Mike's ability just to cut through the noise. And Mike could communicate up and down the food chain. He could talk to the CEO, but then he'd go out to the plant floor and talk to a worker. And Mike commanded great knowledge of, the tech stack, business acumen, everything, because he kept getting his hands dirty, right? He kept in touch with the business. And as I see leaders today coming and going, and I see less of that desire to sometimes roll up the sleeve. And I think that does start to build a little bit. and build this missing of that critical thinking skill gap because um, I think there's an appreciation for those job rotation programs that you hear in the days of
Right.
GE because
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
do think it helps you understand the business or understand how companies work and how to think through things. And, the generation coming out today has a different set of life events and they have a
Right.
different lens to look at things than I
Yeah.
did. And when I talk to them, I have to put myself in their shoes when I explain things to them. And I always say they're coming at it with a different perspective. But at the end of the day, my job as a leader is to say, look, you have to understand I'm building a bridge to the future for you to be the next leader. And for you to be successful, you have to think when you make a decision, the ramifications.
Correct. Yeah.
And it's just not a vacuum. And I think a lot of the generation coming in today makes their decisions in a vacuum because they haven't necessarily seen the ramifications that the previous generations have seen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really interesting observation. There is a stat I found. 20 employees spend 28% of their work week on email and 20% on information service searches. Right. It, as you talked about the role of communication, right? What do you think that plays in effective leadership, right? And how is that going to change? Because as you pointed out, right, there's a million different ways. I've got basically, how did I count it? Like 8 different ways of getting in touch with me about something, right? So, if you didn't get in touch with me, it's really not my fault. I gave you all of the different options, right?
Right.
They're there. It's easy to get in touch, but that makes it also very difficult, like complexity in communication, right? So now as a CEO, maybe back in the day I could, release a short video or a way of communicating with my firm. Now I've got all sorts of different ways of communicating and generations that I need to communicate to. In your experience, what are you seeing being effective today?
Leaders that create purposeful touch points. And what I mean by that is, I just think of my own team, and I'm the same way as you. I have multiple ways of getting in touch with me: email,
Mm-hmm.
text, Teams, telephone, carrier pigeon, smoke signal, whatever you want to. But, I think about when I need to communicate with my leadership staff, I need to create those purposeful touch points with them, which means taking time out of my schedule and stopping the noise around us and putting a bubble around us and saying, we need to have a dialogue and defining clearly what we need to talk about. And making sure that when we start the conversation, there's clear expectations of what we're going to talk about. And when we leave, do we have the same common understanding?
Right.
Because that's what's key is there, communication is a two-way street. And a lot of times people think communication is a one-way street. Communication is a two-way street. And when you leave a conversation, I always ask my team, can you play back what you think you heard? Because if they
Right.
can't play back, or they may play it back exactly, or they may say, yeah, oh no, that's not what I meant. Especially when you're managing global teams and
Right.
you have nationalities, you have different life
Yeah.
events.
Very good point. Yeah.
That's what's so key is you have to build a lexicon that's common language across the world. And I think purposeful touch points is what's key today. And,
Right.
written word is awesome, but the English language is complex, you know?
Yeah.
And it can get misinterpreted. And I go back to, everybody laughs about emojis. But if you go back to
Yeah.
the early form of communication, it was hieroglyphics on a cave
Right.
wall.
That's
We're
right.
almost going back to that with emojis.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I'm not going to do a spoiler, but for anybody who hasn't watched the show Adolescence, right? It's a wake up on that
Yeah.
side as well. Um, no, you bring up a couple really interesting points. The having the different methodologies to communicate. Obviously, with large language models and being able to translate, that's huge as well, right? Where you used to remember there were days not that long ago where there were translation services, right? That was a thing, right? Now
Yeah.
that's ChatGPT, right? Or Claude or whoever. So at the end of the day, I think that's one component of it. Um, the other component I think is really hard as you get kind of a little bit further up in your leadership is making space for intentional types of conversations, right? So there's the business conversations I've got SIOP meetings, I've got my executional meetings that I've got to have, I've got to have meetings about inventory, I've got to have meetings about this, and then I've got my HR touch points, I've got my team meetings, right? And all of a sudden it becomes overwhelming, right? You have um, you know, you know 60-70% of your day job is attending meetings where you're simply you know consuming information from your team who's communicating it to you, and vice versa, communicating back different things to your team that you may know, or directions that you may have, right?
Yeah. What one of the things I talked about and I've talked to my team about is as a leader, and this may sound weird or may sound off, is how many leaders teach their team how to communicate with them
Yeah. Right.
effectively. You know,
Yeah.
I, I've told my leaders, look, I'm a morning person. I like to consume information via email, and I don't like coming into a meeting cold and getting presented information without a pre-read. So that's how, if you want to effectively communicate with me,
Right.
here's the parameters. So, it may sound odd, but it helps establish it. At the same time, they may say, you know what, I'm okay with you just sending me a rapid text in
Right.
Teams. I don't need email because I get overwhelmed, and I'm okay with Teams. That's fine. I can adjust my style, but that's
Right.
developing that working relationship and go back to what I talked about earlier with trust. You got to have
Yeah.
trust, but as a leader, you have to be vulnerable as well.
Right. Right. Absolutely. um I'm going to go back to your comments about change management, right? As being the primary cause. I think it was 95% of ERP projects cite poor change management as a primary cause. Right now, granted, this statistic comes from ProSci, which is a change management kind of architecture, but at the end of the day, it's probably not that far off, right? I think of the failures and low adoption, all that kind of stuff. That being a one of the primary. Do you believe that stat? I mean, and what's your experience around proper change management?
Hey, I believe the stat. Is it 95%? Is it 80%? You're cutting hairs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's high. It's a high number. And I think the reason change management is so difficult is because it's an underinvested, easy to cut
Yeah.
item on a project when it starts overrunning.
Hmm.
So you go back to the
Yeah.
earlier conversation about budget overrun.
Yeah.
Well, we'll just cut the budget for change management. We'll just send them a job aid or we'll just do that,
Yeah.
right? And often change management kind of falls to the HR team, or we'll just give it to the techie IT team. And it's okay to give it to the IT team or the implementer, but I find that a holistic change management approach really does make a difference. Even in my projects today, I have a dedicated OCM leader and
Yeah.
a dedicated program director. They are the key differentiators to me being successful
Yeah.
because that OCM leader, all he does is focus on, okay, this is where they're at currently. How are we going to get them across the bridge to the new place?
That's
And
right.
and his full job is to keep the project team, the techs in the room that think they know better than the business, to keep them honest. Just like the program director or the project manager's key job is to keep the trains on time,
Right. Yeah.
right? And if you don't have those two key roles in an ERP implementation, you will fail.
Yeah.
You have to have it. And As
Yep.
a ERP leader, my job is to educate my stakeholders and protect those roles because I guarantee you, as important as blood is to the body, here is the top three things I will hear the moment day two comes around and it's chaos in the plant. Master data was wrong. We didn't spend enough time on training, and people don't know what to do. Those will be the top three things I will hear. I
Yeah.
won't hear the system doesn't work. I won't hear the fact that business didn't show up for training. And I won't hear the fact that they have bad business processes.
Right.
But I will hear those will be the top three things. And unless
Mm.
along the way, I am purposely saying, look, we're not on track where we need to be with our master data cleansingness. We're not getting the attendance in the classroom. We're
Right.
not doing what we need to do with business process adherence. And I
Yeah.
don't have these two key leaders working with me as I educate the stakeholders. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah. It is. It is. Yeah, that role of the PM and how they interface with the OCM group and your, master data readiness, all of that are so critical. You're 100% right. And I think that there's additional challenges, right, in today's world, right? You know, digital distractions are thought to cost about 2.1 hours per employee per day in lost productivity, right? Um, do you think AI is creating more distractions that offset the efficiency that it drives? And when does this kind of behavior level off, right? When do we stop being more distracted?
As soon as I stop waking up every morning and hear CNBC tell me that AI boom's over, that's when I
Yeah.
stop being distracted. Um, yeah, because every business meeting I'm in is it tells me how AI is going to solve it.
Yeah.
Um, AI is not going to solve it. It still comes back to basic problem
Okay.
solving. AI can augment and AI can help, but you still got to do the work
That's right.
to get there. And what concerns me with us being general, I use that in a very broad term when I say us, but what concerns me now with AI as the solution is if we don't think about how the solution will work or we don't know how the solution is going to work, how do we know AI is giving us the right solution? And
Yeah.
that's what bothers me at the end of the day of where we're headed on this path is I'm like, okay, when I sit in a problem, yes, AI can help, but when the solution is let's go see what AI can do, it's like, can we at least take 5 minutes and deconstruct the problem
Yeah.
and just follow the basic five whys?
Right. Right.
Maybe we don't even need to go plug it into Chat GPT
Right. Right.
or Claude or Gemini or pick your soup du jour of the day AI
Right.
model.
Right.
Let's
Right.
let's just use some basic thinking skills. And then if I want a different perspective, we can utilize it. But to jump right to that, it scares me because then it's like if AI may take me down a path that's wrong, it may make the problem worse for me. And how do
Right.
I don't know that I got worse because at the end of the day, I didn't even know what the real problem was because I didn't spend any time doing any analysis of the problem.
There are some studies that have been linking AI and usage in use in younger folks and their neuroplasticity and ability to continue to problem solve, right? So that I think that is a correlation that is now kind of becoming scientifically evidential, right? It one of the I believe one of the big causes you support, right, is in veterans and veteran support groups. Maybe tell me a little bit about kind of your experience because I think there's a correlation between ability to problem solve and discipline and those types of things and what you've observed and being involved in that in those causes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I support the veterans, and I think one of the things about the veterans that always kind of tugs at the heartstrings is, first off, just their service that gets to you, and
Yeah.
their stories, and if you really sit down and listen to them and just respect them, and listen to their life events. It really makes you appreciate what you're able to do today and
Yeah.
puts things in perspective as someone that's in the field that I'm in, because I think all of us in the business world need perspective because
Yeah.
we think our problems are the biggest problems in the world, but then you talk to someone that's in a battlefield that, his buddy was walking in front of him and he turned around and in the moment his buddy wasn't there.
Yeah.
And we're worried about the shipments going out the door.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I need that perspective. And I think that perspective's there. But what gets me is every morning I go for these walks in the morning. My mornings start around 4 a.m. And when the weather's nice here in Indiana, I like to go for a 7 to 8 mile walk in the morning. And I go by the veterans post. And every morning when the sun's coming up, these veterans are out there raising the flag.
Yeah.
And I can
That's great.
set my watch by it. And it's that type of discipline that I'm like, if I could
Hmm.
just get my business, my team, my ex to have that discipline in my life, or if I could just even have that discipline in what I'm trying to do every
Right.
day,
Right. Right.
how much better would I be? People talk about the 1% or you just give 1% more. And I'm like, okay, that's gimmicky. Go see it every day. These guys don't miss a day. They're there.
Right.
And so, I give it to these guys. I tell people when it comes to veterans, okay, I understand everybody's got a political view about war and all that. Okay, I get that. And I'm not here to make a stand or anything, but these guys served our country. And it's because they did what they did. We're able to have those viewpoints. If you see them, buy them dinner. Take a moment and thank them.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
just have a moment with them because they just want to share their story,
Yeah. Don't
but
realize.
appreciate them at the end of the day.
Yeah. I don't realize how much that means just to say thank you for your service. Right.
Yeah.
It's incredibly meaningful. Um, last few questions for you. What does the future excuse me, what does the future CEO look like in terms of communication, decision making, and mindset?
In my mind, the future CEO is going to be someone that can cut through the noise quickly, that can look at an enterprise and see I'll say the digital thread, but can look at the enterprise and not see, the finance department, the supply chain department, the manufacturing department, the customer service department, but can look at the enterprise and say, I can see that customer order and how it flows all the way to cash collection. And
Right.
doesn't see the barriers of the
Hmm.
departments and doesn't see the silo of the leaders that have built silos and can cut very quickly through it and see how that flows and is able to consume data and facts to make informed decisions quickly and how to leverage that to be competitive. That's going to be what the future is, in my opinion.
Right. Right. Okay. I always end my shows with a prediction, right? So I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to make you give us a prediction about life in 2075, right? Which is, it's a while away from now, 50, right? Hoping we're still around, but it's a while from now. I want you to fill in the blank. I can't believe that we used to fill in the blank.
Well, I can't believe we fill in the blank. I'm going to give you two predictions for
Okay.
2075, and they
All
kind of
right.
go hand in hand. I will say by 2075, we will be a one world currency
Oh, okay. All
because
right.
and you could say crypto or whatever, but I think
Yeah, yeah,
we're
yeah,
headed to one world currency because at
yeah.
the end of the day, if you really think about it, we're just trading ones and zeros in our bank accounts. And I think we will finally have transitioned to life as a service. The ideal of home ownership, car ownership, the ideal of owning
Hmm.
large material objects will be done, and we will just be a variable cost on my balance sheet. So if I want this month to, or for this set of time, $1,000 for my living expenses, this will be at what level I want to live at. So it'll almost be like a bronze, silver, gold, platinum, titanium living
Huh.
lifestyle.
Okay.
I really think
That's a hot
this,
take. I kind of
yeah,
like it's making me think.
yeah,
And unfortunately, I'm going through the period of my life where, my parents are on the bubble of potentially moving into, longer term, care, right?
Right.
They're not there yet. They want their independence. They have their independence at the moment, right? And but we've begun having the conversation, right? And of course, basically, what's tugging at them is kind of like there's the platinum, gold, and silver homes that they could go into, right? um, you know, and they've worked hard, and I'm kind of encouraging them like, hey, you've done this, you've put all that money in, go to the platinum level home, right? And my mom, who was raised by a Scotsman, right, is she's pinching pennies all of her life, right? So she's like, maybe I should just go here, but really I want to go here, and anyway. So you're kind of suggesting maybe that extends a little bit more into our present lives, right? Where a lot of what we get, we're just kind of buying that, full service
Yeah.
life, if you will. Interesting.
It's life as a service. I mean, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I treat, I mean, yeah, I own my home, right? But
Right.
if I
Right.
really think about it, it's like, do I need all this space? Or can I, that just become a variable expense on my balance sheet? And for this period of time, I want to live in this type of lifestyle.
Hmm.
I, I really think that's the next step forward in where we're headed. And there's lots of talk you could have around it, but
Right.
I think the baby boomers retiring and what you just talked about, the platinum, titanium, or gold, silver, platinum packaging will start to trickle down to the next
Hmm.
generations to set it up. And even in my 40s right now, I'm starting to think about how do I put my life in kind of that progressive silver, gold, platinum, titanium package so that it can just be a managed expense until I go pass away.
Right. Well, that is a hot take. If that doesn't make you think for a while, I don't know. I don't know what you spend your time thinking about, but that's a great one. I'm happy for that. So, Nick, thank you so much for coming on. Really, really terrific discussion. I'm actually gonna potentially point a few of my clients towards some of your advice there on the SAP side and say, yeah, hey, it's not just me, right? This is
So happy to help.
this is this is well-known information. So anyway, thank you very much for all your time and appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you very much.